Salutations. I'm your host, CEO, and Chairman of the Board, Patrick Scott. On the show, where we interview regular people like you and me who are bored enough to come on the show with the understanding that each and every one of us has a unique and interesting story. If you'd like to tell your story, we'd love to give you a seat on the board. Just email chairmanoftheboardlu@gmail.com. We record and upload weekly at LUTV News and Media online. And now, this board meeting is in session. This week's guest we are very excited to have on the show. She is a junior here at Lamar University, president of Zeta Tau Alpha sorority, and comes from a family of entrepreneurs around the area. Introducing Mindy Escobedo. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me today, Patrick.
It's good to have you in.
Thank you.
So tell me a little bit about entrepreneurship, growing up in a family full of business owners and leaders. What was that like?
So it actually started with my grandparents. They migrated from Mexico to the United States about 40 years ago, right before my mom, so about 45 years ago, 46 years ago.
What part of Mexico do you mind?
My grandmother and my grandfather are from Monterrey, so
Okay.
Monterrey de Leon, in the mountains. I've only been there once, so I'm not really sure what region it is. But they came down. My grandfather was actually born in Texas when it was, or his family was born in Texas when it was still belonging to Mexico.
Really?
Yes, so coming to the United States was like home for him. Not so much for my grandmother, though. They had to work very, very hard to get to where they are, to build the family that they had of 5 kids. They lived in Port Arthur. That's where I live currently, and I've grown up there. But really, they always instilled in my mom and the 4 brothers that hard work gets you anywhere. Whatever it is, even if you're not good at it, as long as you try, that's going to get you farther than not trying, even if you are good at it. My grandfather worked in the shipyards at the Port of Port Arthur, the Port of Orange, and the Port of Beaumont almost every single day. Would work 24-hour shifts.
That's hard
when they
work.
needed him. Yes, when they needed him, he would work 24-hour shifts. So there was times where my grandmother and the 5 kids would not see my grandfather. And he did that to provide for his family. And eventually my grandmother was able to open her own flower shop. So that's where we get the entrepreneurship from.
Okay.
It's still open today, Olvera's Florist in Port Arthur. And since
What was the name of
Olvera's Florist.
Olvera's Florist.
Yes, it's on 9th Avenue, just in case anybody cares to know.
Okay.
And from that, all the brothers and my mom were able to see what working in a business was like. So getting to work your own hours, having someone to train, having income coming in as long as you're working what you need to. And that just grew a spark in every single one of them. So entrepreneurship is very, very big in my family. My mom's an owner of 5 businesses, which I help her manage.
5
businesses.
Whoa.
She does investments in a lot of things. One thing more recently was the casino that's coming to Beaumont. She had a lot to do with that development. So we've worked a lot hand in hand with Congress in the state of Texas, state representatives, things like that. That was probably an entire summer of work that we went and did. So it was very, very exciting to just get to see how the legislation process works. And it didn't pass, but we're hoping for it to pass in the next session.
That's incredible.
Yes. My uncle owns an automotive shop. He's owned that since he was 18 years old. He was the first of the 5 to open a business on his own.
And he was working in Olvera's Florist
Yes.
as well.
And he actually started off working on bikes. So his friends
Okay.
would break their bikes and he'd be like, oh, let me fix it for you. And that's where he was like, you know what, I think I want to start doing this on cars.
Yeah, I can make a buck off of this.
Yes.
Huh?
So
Okay.
that was when he was younger, and then him and his wife started a family, and he's like, I need to provide for my family. And he started working on cars on the sides, and then eventually opened his own business. A block from there are my mom's offices and my Uncle Warren's offices. My Uncle Warren also owns businesses. He's doing downtown development in downtown Beaumont and Port Arthur. He's a very big real estate developer. He does taxes for people. He's a tax operator for H&R Block, so he owns his own agency. Then my
Let's hear
uncle
about
Michael-
Mindy for a second. Yeah, let's hear about Mindy.
Well, I've liked to have said that I've followed in my parents' footsteps a lot.
Absolutely.
My dad also owns businesses, so I help him with that as well. And I've gotten to learn since I was born, really, because the businesses had already been developed that my parents had together. So I was able to see the long hours that they were putting into it, the relationships that they were building with people, just really everything around it from beginning to end, morning to night. I was able to see that. At around age 7, I started going to business meetings with my mom.
7 years old.
7 years old.
Okay.
And she'd be like, Mindy, because I'm very attached to my parents till this day.
Okay.
And to my mom, to her hip. So if I was with her, she was picking me up from school and she's like, hey, I have to drop you off at grandma's house. I have a meeting. I'd beg her to let me go.
Nope, you're not leaving.
And she's like, no, you're not going. And I'd start crying and she'd be like, she finally was like, okay, let me give her what she wants. She's like, you're allowed to go if you sit quiet and take notes. That's what she had me do. What 7-year-old knows what notes to take in a meeting? So I'm just doodling.
You didn't know how to scribe right off the bat?
Yeah, I'm
What's
like,
going
oh
on?
my gosh, Mom, why are you doing this to me already? But thankfully now I'm able to have a very big vocabulary when it comes to business, and I'm able to understand a lot of what goes on in business meetings because I was brought to them at such a young age. And from then, that just piqued my interest. So in middle school, I started buying things from the dollar store, school supplies, and selling them for triple or double what I bought them for. And then me and my sister kind of opened a small business during COVID of selling face masks that were sewn, handmade in Mexico.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yes, so we did
I know a lot
that.
of people did that during the
Yes,
time, and it helped out
I was
a lot.
one of them.
It helped out a lot
Yes.
because a lot of people could not find masks
Yep.
anywhere. There was
Yep.
this big shortage.
And actually, when we went to Mexico originally, when I went to Monterrey, that's the only time that I had gone. We had gone there on business to bring masks to the United States. Masks, gloves. It was with a company out of Georgia. That was the biggest business transaction I'd ever worked on. We sent a plane full of PPE to the Kingdom of Bahrain.
A plane full.
Yes, a plane full.
Wow.
Of gloves, Germex, masks, like the personal protective gear, like from head to toe, everything. We supplied them in Bahrain with that. And I worked on that. How crazy, I was 18 years old.
So, so let's backtrack a little
It's
bit.
a lot.
So from the mountains of Mexico, migrated, started working in the shipyard, grandmother started her own business, 5 children, balancing all of that. You at age 7 landing the Johnson account, tailing mom and scribing things, and that's wild. That's impressive. Very impressive.
And I enjoy it.
Okay, so let's talk about college life. So did things change, stay the same? Did they slow down a little bit, going from flying planes to Bahrain full of PPE to just now we're studying and doing college
So
life?
my first real job was actually in high school. I
Okay,
worked
yeah.
for JJF Properties in downtown Beaumont. I helped manage a lot of their properties there, and then I transitioned into college. So I believe I was with them for another year into college. But during that time, my first semester, I had what's called an arterial vessel malformation, where I had 1.5 inches of bleeding in my brain. So I
Oh,
was
wow.
going at it really, really fast. I'm like, I'm out of high school. I make my own schedule now. I just have to show up to classes. And then October of 2019, that happened, and it kind of just put my life on pause.
Oh, wow.
No
Okay.
one was expecting it in the family. It's not hereditary. It's just something that you're born with. But usually you don't get a CAT scan of your kid when they're born,
No.
unless a doctor tells you to. So I was born with it, and if we would have done that, then I would have known, and it would have been operated on when I was a baby. But it happened, burst out of nowhere, lost vision in my eye, could not drive for 2 weeks. And that was just a really big eye-opener for my family.
It sounds scary.
Yes, it was definitely the scariest moment of my life. The doctor was like, we don't have to operate on it right now, but eventually within the next 10 years, there's going to be a 30% chance that it's going to rupture again, and you're going to be unable to speak or walk. So within 1.5 years, I decided, I'm like, Mom, Dad, this is like my time. Like I need to do it now before I get married and have kids, and I'm no longer able to provide for my family because I was selfish and didn't want to have a surgery to keep that from happening again. So last August, in between that time, that year and a half of me getting a surgery, I still...
You had the forethought to think of all of that while your life was in sort of the middle of a crisis.
I'm very
That's
empathetic.
impressive.
That is one of my character traits, is I care a lot about people, whether I know you or not. I'm always thinking about people.
Important in a leader.
Yes, and that's just who I am. That's who I've always been. That's who I plan to be for the rest of my life, just understanding and constantly thinking of what can happen next to me that might affect other people. But during that year and a half of deciding whether or not I was going to get the surgery, I became an ambassador for the university, president of my sorority. I was on the board of a few nonprofits, started my own nonprofit, which is called Foster a Friend Foundation.
What is that?
We're getting funding for it right now, but basically what it is we want to start a home for homeless pets, so that kids that are in the foster system, when they transition out into being adopted or find a forever home, they're able to take one of these animals with them for emotional support. And the reason behind that is my dad was a foster kid growing up, and hearing the stories that he went through where he had to change homes constantly is not something that I'd ever want anybody to go through alone. So we provide these pets for them, and they're able to build a bond with them, and even if they don't feel at home with the family that they have, they're going to feel at home with the pet that they have. So we're finding funding for that currently right now so we can get that started.
Well, so
it's a lot.
it's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Is there any advice that you would have for other college students that are maybe going through an event themselves, how to persevere through a crisis like that, and maybe leadership as well along the way?
It was all advice that my mom gave me. I'm going to give credit where it's due.
Okay.
My mom and my dad have always been my biggest supporters. Until this day, they continue to be. During that time, I was depressed for a very long time after my surgery, which was last August. And I was kind of just in a mental funk that I didn't want to get out of. I didn't let myself get out of until about 5 months ago. But my mom's like, I don't care if you're in it or not, you need to do what you need to do because you have responsibilities as a leader in your community. You have younger cousins that look up to you. Your younger sister is still in high school. So for me, it was like, I'm not in it mentally, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it was really hard for me to have any motivation or drive to be a part of any organization. And people didn't know that. I didn't show that to the community. I didn't show that to the only person that saw it was my mom.
You got grit?
Yes, and it was definitely a really, really hard time for me mentally and physically, but I kept pushing until I got out of it, and now that I'm out of it, I'm upset that I let myself get there because I could have stopped myself from being there. So the advice that I'd give to others going through a hard situation is don't let those negative thoughts come into your mind and eat you alive. Because if you feed off of them, it's just never going to stop. And that's what I did. I fed off of them, and I thought about them, and I sat in it. I sat in the sadness. I sat in the insecurities. And instead of pushing them away, I just accepted them. And that's something I'll never do.
My therapist calls that a negative feedback loop.
Yes.
Yeah.
A negative feedback loop.
You're absolutely
That's
right.
what I was doing. And
Gotta get rid of
it was my own fault that I didn't appreciate that year almost. It was almost a year that I was in that funk. And I didn't help people as much as I needed to. And I understand people always say you need time for yourself, but I think it's more important to have time for others because you can't truly find yourself if you're not helping others. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
No, it makes sense.
Because you learn different personalities. You get to learn what people are going through, why they're the way they are. And I think that was really eye-opening for me to go through that, but at the same time, I'm like, why did you let yourself get there? So it's like, for me, being a college student, I know a lot of people go through difficult situations, losing loved ones. I know a lot of the times we're in serious relationships and they break off, whether it's with a friend, a family member, your significant other, and we let that kind of downfall on us. But don't let yourself get there. Like, there's always gonna be better days. I'm a really firm believer in like telling yourself that you love yourself, even if you don't in that moment. And that's what helped me get out of it. Even if you don't believe it, there are proven studies that if you tell yourself every single day something that you don't believe about yourself, that you're beautiful, that you're handsome, that you're worth everything that you believe you are or that you want to be, eventually your mind's going to accept it because you tell yourself that so
There's
much.
a metaphor that I've heard and I really like. It's if you see somebody drowning in a pool and you go to help them without getting stable footing, they're going to pull you right in with
Yeah.
them. And so always make sure yourself is grounded
Yep.
and that you've got yourself.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
absolutely right.
And that's a mistake that I made, is I didn't have myself grounded, but now I understand. And I'm able to empathize with people that are struggling with mental health, that aren't really strong in what they want to be or think they should be. So that's like my biggest advice, is just always love yourself, because you can't love others if you don't love yourself first.
That's good advice. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. We ran a little bit over, but maybe we could have you back in and tell the rest of your story. There's
I'd
so
love
much
that.
more to cover, and that would
Very
be great.
little time, but it's
Very little time.
I'm glad I was invited here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming in, and thank you for watching. If you would like to come on the show and tell your story, please email chairmanoftheboardlu@gmail.com.